Hey everybody, this is James P. Wagner here with Local Gems Press. I'm here with Nick Hale,
Hey James, hey everybody.
and this is the Publisher Speakeasy, our Don't Tell Anybody show behind the scenes, where we talk about publishing and poetry topics based on questions that you have given us, either sent in via email, live when we're on tour. We get a lot of people coming up to us asking us these questions, a lot of the same questions over and over. A lot of our seminars and our courses, we get these questions in the Q&As, and so we decided let's put them on video so that we can just refer people to them, even though we know we're going to get them again anyway. So today's question is, actually, we talk about this in various different ways in a lot of our, seminars and talks or whatever in our lectures. But it's basically, can you talk a little bit about print on demand and how that has changed the publishing industry? And yeah, that's basically it has been a pretty big sort of paradigm shift, the overused term for pretty much everything when it comes to publishing, but it really kind of has changed things, because but it's one of those ways where technology has sort of kind of brought things back to a similar way that it used to be through like more efficiency, because in the 20th century, especially the latter half of the 20th century, publishing was kind of controlled by big juggernauts because of the way that distribution worked, and the need for they would basically, if they're going to publish your book, they would kind of decide in advance how many copies was going to be the first print run, and usually it was like 5,000, 10,000 copies or whatever. They would then send it to their printers, and they would have that amount made, and then they would kind of have to figure out how to go about selling the copies after the big run was made. And then they would hook up with a distributor, get into stores, do like the book signing and the tours, and later on the radio shows, the TV shows, and all that stuff. But basically, like, once it was published, it was like, here's this giant stack of books that we have now, and now we have to move it. Whereas print on demand is, there's a couple different ways it's kind of changed things, because now it's like you don't really need, that big of an investment, anymore, and either financially or in the number of books, because there's a lot of services now where you literally can, basically you take your files, your formatted manuscript, your cover art, and all that stuff, you upload it to their servers online, and then they give you the option that you can basically order however many copies you want of that. So if you want exactly 27 copies, you could get 27 copies. And also, if it goes up on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, it can sell without you actually having to even have the books already made. Because if somebody decides, somebody in Australia decides they want your book, and they click on it and they buy it, then the printers at the services will literally make up that book and send it to them. So it wasn't made until there was a demand for it, literally, and then they give you whatever percentage that's worked out with that. In fact, on the west coast of the U.S., there's actually even some bookstores that kind of operate like that, where they actually have printing machines in the back, where it's like there's one copy of all the titles on the shelf, and if somebody wants it, they'll literally go make a new copy of that book for them. It sounds like a lot of work, and in some ways it is for the setup anyway, but especially when machines are getting involved, it actually opens up the doors a lot for a lot of new titles to sort of be available that wouldn't before, because there's no real, the barrier of entry is kind of a lot less, which is sort of a good and a bad thing. But it's opened up opportunities so that you don't need to put up tens of thousands of dollars in having a huge amount of inventory that you kind of hope sells, and usually didn't, if you were self-publishing or whatever. So now it's made it a lot easier, more affordable, and as a result of that, you've had people who've kind of slowly but surely kind of grown their audience that way, by being able to, by having that availability.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, or you sort of almost touched on, a lot of the work for printing comes from the setup. So
Mm,
if you think of it from the printer's perspective, the reason why they have those minimums and the reason why when you do print on demand, the more copies you buy, the cheaper it gets, is because they're making more money when you have a larger order for essentially the same amount of work, because 90% of the work is in that setup.
mm,
So, if you're doing 3 hours worth of work for one copy sold versus doing 3 hours worth of work for 3,000 copies sold, the math kind of makes sense that you would be paying more per copy for the smaller ones on print on demand, but also that the more traditional models have those high minimums that they do because they don't want to invest the amount of work that it takes to set up the job for somebody who's going to buy 5 copies of the book. And probably sell two of them and then keep the rest in their basement for 10 years. Um, so that's why those minimums exist in the first place, and that's why that model moved the way it did. And the thing is, in the 20th century, once you started getting this rapid transport and mass communications, once publishers were able to reach way farther than they ever were, those minimums went up and up because their distribution networks grew. So the expected number of copies for a bestseller, for example, went up because more people, you're going to be able to get the same book in front of more eyes, especially once you have radio and television and advertising pushing that book. So not only are more people going to be able to see it because you have the mass transportation that can move those books further, but more people are going to be hearing about it and wanting it.
Yeah, and so you had like, these publishing, giants that basically, I mean, realistically, they sort of had monopoly on the distribution, for the reason the minimums were high. They had all the connections to the places to actually distribute and all that stuff. And so it required a lot of money and a lot of time. And so, your average person, really couldn't compete with that. Your small presses couldn't really compete with that. But now with print on demand, you know, um, smaller publishers that kind of work with, finesse, in terms of like they get the number of copies that they need for their specific events or their specific audiences or their tours or things like that. It's like they've been able to invest much smaller amounts of money up front, but then kind of grow the business little by little. A lot of authors have done the same, where they start out with a book and now there's really like if you wanted to self-publish again, like 30 years ago, there was a much bigger financial risk in doing so than there is now. I mean, it's still basically the same, that you have to do all the work essentially or pay for the work to be done, and then you're still responsible for selling the book yourself. That part hasn't changed. But the thing is now it's like, other than the effort of writing the book, it's like if you're going to do that, you may be out a couple of $100 rather than five or 10,000 if it doesn't work out back then, because there were all these packages for that where it's like for $5,000 you get like 1,000 copies of the book and bookmarks, and you keep the movie rights and just all this a lot of crap essentially that came along with it. Whereas and then you would go out there, you might have a book launch, you'd sell 50 copies, and then the other 950 would be just kind of sitting in the garage for a while. And yeah, so print on demand has made it that if you're planning a book launch and that you're going to have 100 people at the book launch, it's like you can order 100 copies for that event, and then you pretty much you sell them out. You could then order another 100 copies for your next event, and so on and so forth. And if you are planning a big tour, the good thing about it is if you do have a need of that larger amount too, like say you're planning like a 40 stop book tour across the country, you can buy yourself several thousand copies as well, because they can handle that either way. So it's a good thing. And even when you're dealing with small publishers and small printers and presses now, it's like a lot of them, they still might have minimums, but the minimums are much smaller than they used to be, thanks to print on demand technologies. Because like they might have 25 is a pretty common minimum. We have that a lot for like our chapbook challenges. Other places a 50 copy minimum, even a 100 copy minimum, that some places have. It's like it might be a little bit more, but it's a whole lot better than it used to be. And because and then you've got certain things like Amazon's KDP or Lulu or whatever, that they don't have any minimums except one, essentially, to buy just one copy. But that's because pretty much it's all like software. They have a whole just service online. You do all the work, and then of the setup, which is the thing, like Nick was saying, is the hardest part for printers essentially. So that's why they can kind of afford to do that, because if you do all the work of setting it up, then it's like, oh, it's $5 for them that they didn't have before, because essentially like that.
Yeah.
But
Another advantage of print on demand is it's basically fulfill on demand. So if you are doing a book tour and you want a couple thousand copies, you might not want to have that couple thousand copies with you up front, because I don't know if you realize, but books are heavy. Like they're not the easiest thing to move. So if you're going to be traveling extensively for your book tour, you can actually have a partial shipment sent to you wherever you're staying, so that you don't need to worry about lugging the whole 1,000 or 2,000 copies with you the whole way. So that
hold
you
on,
can kind of
a second.
space out those.
Books are heavy.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Like
and
stop the presses
the,
because they're too
the,
heavy and you
the,
can't keep making them.
And they take up space. Okay, that explains a lot about the storerooms in the back of my bookstore. All right.
Yeah, which is which is the next thing I was going to touch on is that books take up a lot of space, and
Hmm.
not everybody has a lot of space to spare in, where they're living or where they're working, their office, their store, their bookstore, their home. So if you want to keep, it makes it a lot easier because you don't need to keep a large inventory, then you can still distribute. You can still sell on a larger scale without having to keep that inventory in house all the time. You don't need
Hmm.
to order 5,000 at a time and dedicate your entire garage to your memoir or your
Hmm.
poetry book or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, and then I guess, on the other side of things too is, like while on the one hand, more opportunity, for a lot more people is a good thing. It also, when the barrier of entry becomes too low, you also do get the other side where you get a lot of dilettantes and a lot of, basically, flavor of the week people coming in being like, oh, that's easy. Let me try to do that. And so you kind of have to deal with that a lot these days. I mean, you really have to deal with that with pretty much everything, but there's a lot of, like hobbyist might even be the nice word for it. Cause there's a lot of people think, oh, well, if that's all it takes, let me do that or whatever. And they, at least on the lower levels, they kind of muddy the water sometimes. Cause you may have known that there's you know, a few titles on Amazon, just a few. There's just, a little of them. And so, that's kind of one thing is, like, I mean, we've been doing this for 13 years, I mean, in poetry groups, and we can't tell you how many flavor of the month poetry groups pop up here or there, or authors thinking, oh, I'm going to do this here or there, and they put very little time and very little effort into it because they think it's easy because the barrier of entry has become easy, but then a month later they're not around because they didn't really actually do the legwork. So it's on the one hand it's made publishing and printing look a lot easier than because whatever. But again, you go back to like Ben Franklin's time, it was like anybody could walk into the print shop and be like, oh, I want to get this printed. I mean, even in the 20th century, anybody could walk into, like Kinko's or whatever, and get something printed. So that that's not really the hard part exactly of publishing. The hard part is what you do with it after it's made, kind of.
Yeah. Basically the first floor is a little bit lower,
Mhm.
but the top floor is still the top floor and it's
Yeah.
still where it always has been. So there still takes the same amount of work to
Mhm.
be polished and professional and to do really well, but it doesn't take as much work to get started.
Yeah. No, definitely. And for the people who are really going to put in the grind and whatever, I mean, like honestly, you could say the print on demand basically created Local Gems Press, at this point, because that was, how we, did our books. And because it was like, I mean, the first book that, Local Gems ever actually did, the examination anthology, going way old school now, back in 2010. Um, I don't even actually remember the number of copies that I ordered at first, which you'd think that at this point I would go back and research that, but it was something like it was either 70 or 75. It was a very low number. Um, and it was an anthology of 39 poets, and basically we were launching it at the college I was going to grad school at, in the poetry club. We paid for food or whatever, and so it was in the ballroom. And but I knew I was going to have this event, so that's why I ordered that many number of copies. I knew this many people were going to be there, and I was kind of judged like, maybe they'll want like, maybe most of these people might want 2 copies, maybe, so I tried to average it like 1.5 of what I thought the attendance was going to be or whatever, and I figured, if I got a few left over, that's fine. But I remember that the first order back then, it cost me like $460, was essentially how Local Gems got started. That was like money I made at a part-time job to do that printing, and then we sold the copies, and obviously for a profit. And then it was like, okay, so now there's more money to invest into the next title, and so the next one, more of a print run, a little better quality. Then it's like, do that a couple times, okay, now there's this much money is in the budget for this book, so we could hire a better formatter, a better graphic designer for the cover. There was like, it started being more and more in there, but it was like that step-by-step building process. And like at this point, we've published and printed hundreds of thousands of copies of books. But it all started because print on demand made it so that those stepping stones, made it possible that, like, because like in the beginning, if it was like, oh, I would have had to put in like, $10,000 to do that. It's like, there's a very very good chance that that book wouldn't have happened. you know. So So yeah, in that regard, it's made it a lot easier for small presses to kind of in a way sort of take back some of the publishing market share. The ones that are willing to put the time and the effort into that. It's also made it possible for certain niches that were kind of overlooked in publishing for a lot of years to actually now sort of cater to that niche. Because there were a lot of uh, certain subgenres, for example, that may have been overlooked, or books that may be for specific topics that maybe big publishers weren't going to take like a $20,000 financial chance on, but now people could do that themselves, or there's a small press now that might be willing to put a few $100s into putting that out there and see what happens. It's made the gamble a lot more reasonable, and so a lot more people are kind of gambling on it. And so you're seeing a lot of things that you wouldn't have really seen in the 20th century, but at the same time it's also blurred the lines between like what is traditional publishing and what is self-publishing, because there's like a lot of new sort of hybrid half things with that. And there's a lot of confusion on that, which is why we offer seminars on the differences between publishing and self-publishing. But it sort of brought it back to, again, like the period like when Walt Whitman would walk to the print shop and pay money to get Leaves of Grass done. The only difference between what was publishing and self-publishing back then was just who was paying the bill. Because they were all being sold in the same places essentially if you made a deal with the bookseller.
Yeah. Well, I guess one thing that's different from now to back then though is the anonymity too. But you can put up a book under a pseudonym and no one would ever know it was you. But if you have walk into a print shop to have a book published, you actually need to interact with someone. And even if it's just one person, they're going to remember who you are. But it also encourages innovation where a lot of publishers would, if you have something that's strange or unusual, not just niche, but maybe something that's completely new or a blend of things that's never been done before. Most traditional publishers may look at that and say, yeah, I'm not trying that. But then you can just go ahead and do it yourself, print on demand, and see what happens. And that even goes for things that defy genres.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's more experimental things out there. It's worth actually
Yeah.
noting, that the print on demand thing, like we're talking about it, from the book point of view, obviously, because well, that's what we're here for. But it's worth noting that that model is sort of kind of it's gone beyond books. There's a lot of things out there that are kind of print on demand now. I mean, a lot of you may have seen like YouTube celebrities or people you watch on there who are offering T-shirts or hats or all these like just all kinds of merchandise with your logo on it. And that's basically kind of the same thing. It's really print on demand. It's just, for a lot of those people, they don't actually own any inventory, or if they do, they have very little inventory. And it's basically just they put up a logo or they have a catchphrase or something that they talk about. They put it up there, and then people go and they buy it, and then these other manufacturers basically will fulfill that order, make the things as needed, etc. I mean, a lot of people probably know about Vistaprint, which basically it's kind of print on demand for a lot of things. I mean, it's a service, but essentially it's like you need this many business cards, you need this many, this many doormats, you need this many postcards or whatever. There's so much merchandise on there like that, and then there's a lot of places that do that for just all sorts of apparel, like Zazzle, .com, just to name one. There used to be a place called Cafe Press. I don't think it's there anymore, but there's a lot of them that are like that, where basically, again, it's like it's print on demand. They don't make the thing until the order comes in, either from the person who uploaded it or somebody else, buying it on their behalf. So, in the world we live in now, there's so many things happening, and there's all these parts to kind of the creation of a product. And now there's a lot more companies and people who are willing to kind of take, focus on just a part of that service. So you can just focus on this part of that service. And there's more people, basically to do that now, and it's more ways for them to communicate, so yeah. And I mean, the truth of the matter is it kind of, this type of thing existed for a long time. I mean, it's like, even companies like, like Microsoft or Polaroid, it's like people don't realize like there's, manufacturers based in certain places that basically make all those products for all those companies or whatever. But now it's like this type of thing is just more available to, people on a much smaller, like small timers on a, much more
Yeah, it
consumer
gives you
level
more
scale.
access to the manufacturers,
Yeah.
sort of like how Alibaba gives you direct access to a lot of manufacturers.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, it definitely, when it came about, because I mean, it was really like the early 2000s. You started seeing, print on demand becoming more of a thing. Definitely by the mid 2000s, and then of course by 2010, it was like pretty much just there. But it really did throw kind of a wrench into the way that publishing kind of was, and then ebooks came along and that confused them even further. I mean, well, came along, they were here long before that, but got popular, and so it was all this stuff was kind of, threw a lot of monkey wrenches into the traditional way the publishing was done. But yeah, overall, it created a lot of opportunities, and I definitely think it, was for the better. And who knows what other opportunities will come out, in the next decade or two for that. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, how I think print on demand really changed publishing. So hopefully that satisfactorily answers that question. Um, Thanks for listening to the Publisher Speakeasy. Again, I'm James C. Wagner here with Nick Hale.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Bye.
And if you're looking for poetry prompts, just look in the description below. We got 90 free ones. Should be a link in the description of this video. And if you're looking for any coaching on various publishing topics or trying to get your book out there, either the publishing side or the marketing, you can see that link in the description below. See you next time on the Publisher Speakeasy, but don't tell anybody we're here.
Bye, everyone.